Sometimes we end up in big arguments over a super small, stupid thing. And then we do self-judgment because we're like, what the hell? It was so tiny. Like, what happened? But I'm going to talk about what happened today and how to deal with it. I'm Stacy Rocklein, and it's my mission to eradicate loneliness. And nothing makes us feel more alone than getting in an argument with somebody, taking two people and they disconnect and then they're both alone. So we want to make our way back to each other. And in the case of a really bad fight, it can be hard. And especially when it was so stupid and small that you're like, what happened? What's wrong with us? Is this relationship doomed? Right? It becomes very big and dark and heavy. But let's pull it apart a little bit. What usually happened is there was a small thing that happened, a small little incident within a household or within a conversation. That incident happened and people reacted to it. Now, if you add a big reaction to it, it's probably about a bigger thing, right? It's probably about a feeling of being disrespected or not considered or ignored or voiceless or attacked, right? It's just the little thing is about this bigger part of you that got poked, okay? Then you engaged in argument behaviors. And argument behaviors are sometimes not healthy, right? People shut down, people attack, people yell, people walk away, people refuse to have a conversation. And so that is now a whole nother layer to it. It's the kind of arguing you do, right? And then it feels familiar and it feels bad. And you're like, oh yeah, we always do it this way. We always end up in this kind of argument. This happens over and over. So now you're noticing a pattern. And you're noticing a pattern. And that just feels heavy and huge because it feels like something you can't solve. And then if it's not dark and heavy enough, it's like, oh my gosh, we have all these problems. We have this pattern, and that reminds me of this terrible pattern, and it reminds me of this terrible pattern, and this whole thing is doomed. That's a lot. That's a lot. When really, these are all things that can be dealt with. They have to be dealt with separately, though. If you decide to come back and revisit this conversation, it's too much. There's too many places to go. There's too many different topics. It's like coming into a meeting with like a crazy, messy agenda, not a very clear focus. So pull these apart and have a conversation about each different thing. That way you break up the evaluative part of an argument into things that are manageable. Little conversations where people don't get totally flooded by all of the emotions and all of the darkness and all the heaviness. Can we deal with this one small thing that happened? This little moment. What happened there? You know, what feeling did I have? Remember, it touched something like I felt disrespected or whatever. What did we do well? What could we do differently? Where did it go wrong? What can we try in the future? Like, let's just solve that little problem, right? That little problem is probably solvable. Then you can have a different conversation about your fighting style, right? Here's something that I notice that happens to us, right? Here's a thing that I do that I need to work on. Here's a thing that you do that hurts my feelings. You know, you can start to talk about this pattern and start to disrupt those patterns because that's a different thing. It's how you communicate about the thing. So that can be a different conversation, okay? And then you can start to focus on the patterns, right? We have these patterns in our relationship, and these are very hard to talk about because they are what's called perpetual unsolvable problems by the Gottman Institute. And what that means is they're just going to be a part of this relationship. Every relationship has them. Every two people out there has their perpetual unsolvable problems, okay? Maybe it's money, maybe it's insecurity, it's anxiety, it's parenting, it's something, right? We all have a couple of these issues and these patterns that we fall into. And so instead of being like, oh, we're doomed, this is terrible, it's like, let's just take one of these and work on it. How can we move it forward a little bit? Like, how can we work on this small little part of it? We won't be able to come up with a huge, big solution necessarily, but we can come up with a small solution inside of that problem. So if you can take these big, crazy, hairy fights and divide them out to have a conversation about the separate issues, you can actually make some traction. It's not the end of the world. It's okay. It's a little thing that probably needs to be talked about. It's a fighting style that needs to be addressed and talked about. It's a pattern we want to pay attention to and see if we can make some movement on. And when you take those apart, then they become something manageable and they can become something to work on together. And it isn't this huge dark cloud over your relationship. You're normal. So next time you have a big hairy fight, how can you divide it up into smaller conversations so you can really make some movement on them? And if you tend to have bad fights, it's okay. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes that's the chemistry between two people, but you can pick up some skills for dealing with that. If you grab my free PDF, Top 10 Ways to Have Successful Arguments, there are some tips and tricks in there that will help you stay connected as you have these little conversations. And we all are going to have them. So make sure you grab that. And I wish you the healthiest and most productive conflict, because we're all going to have it. Okay, I'll see you next time.